about it. So the disciples, in their immense wisdom, which I just love the disciples because I can relate to them so many times again and again of how they just fell flat on their face, right? Is in their immense wisdom, they ignore Jesus, and then they do what in verse 46? They start arguing with one another. An argument starts among the disciples as to which of them would be the greatest. Jesus just says, hey, I'm giving up my power. I'm giving up my influence. And the disciples are like, I want to be the greatest. It's me. Jesus, in verse 47, knowing their thoughts, took a little child and had him stand beside him. Then he said to them, whoever welcomes this child in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. For it is the one who is the least among you all who is the greatest. So there's the disciples. They're speaking of greatness. They're thinking in the finite, the here and now. They're thinking influence and power and prestige now. And Jesus is saying, hey, look at this little child. Humility is what it's about. There's greatness not in the now, but in the infinite. Verse 49, Master, said John, we saw someone driving out demons in your name, and we tried to stop him because he's not one of us. Now, the disciples, again, ignore Jesus' comment, his illustration of a child, and they're like, hey, let's talk about this problem. Yeah, good illustration, but let's talk about this problem. There's someone claiming to drive out demons in your name. And Jesus said this, don't stop him. Do not stop him. For whoever is not against you is for you. As the time approached for him to be taken up to heaven, Jesus resolutely set out for Jerusalem, and he sent messengers on ahead who went into the Samaritan village to get things ready for him. The disciples did not understand. They thought Jesus was coming in the here and now to save them. Probably thought everyone is going to respond really well to Jesus. Everyone's going to welcome him with open arms. Verse 53 says this, but the people there did not welcome him because he was heading for Jerusalem. And the disciples are thinking, this is Jesus. He's important. He's doing something great. There's crowds that cheer him. Verse 54, when the disciples, James and John, saw this, that they weren't welcomed, they asked, which is probably like not the best solution, what they suggest here, is they said, Lord, do you want us to call down fire from heaven and destroy them? I love the boldness, right? Like, hey, they're not welcoming you. Let's just call God just to destroy him right here and now. Then everyone will really follow you. They'll be really impressed with you. There's this tension that was developing, right? Jesus was feeling this tension. It said he went resolutely to Jerusalem, knowing what was coming. Think of his prayer that he's going to pray later this week. You can take this cup from me. His heart was to not go to the cross. But then he said, but not my will, but yours. The disciples are trying to figure out how to gain power in this moment. There's this tension between this finite earthly power and this infinite, kingdom-focused reality. Flip over to Matthew chapter 21. The passage that we read in this day is set in the most sacred week of the year. It's the Feast of the Unleavened Bread. It's Passover. And these events unfold around the city of Jerusalem. And whereas Jerusalem at this time had about 40,000 people in it, it would multiply up to 6 times to almost 250,000 people during this week. So the city was full of great excitement and busyness, and people were thankful to be together. They were a part of something, again, larger than themselves. But there was also the tension that was mentioned. People were on edge. Why? Well, if we rewind our story about 1,000 years previous, Jerusalem had become the capital city of ancient Israel in the time of King David. And David and his son Solomon experienced what was considered the greatest period of history for Israel. The country was united. The 12 tribes were under one king. They were large, powerful, safe. And David's reign was associated with power and glory and greatness and justice and righteousness. David was considered a shepherd king. He was revered and respected. So much so that the coming Messiah was called the Son of David. After David's death, things radically changed in Jerusalem. A system of domination replaced justice and righteousness. The people of Israel experienced political oppression, economic exploitation, and religious abuse. And over the next 400 years, Jerusalem would be the center of injustice and betrayal of God's covenant. God's justice had been replaced by human injustice. And the prophets wrote during this time, and we have record of their insight. Here are just three of the prophets. Micah, who wrote in about 700 BC, said this: "Then I said, listen, you leaders of Jacob, you rulers of Israel, should you not embrace justice? You who hate good and love evil, who tear the skin from my people and the flesh from their bones." Some violence going on. Isaiah in the 600s said this: "See how the faithful city has become a prostitute. She was once full of justice. Righteousness used to dwell in her, but now murderers. Your rulers are rebels, partners with thieves. They all love bribes and chase after gifts. They do not defend the cause of the fatherless. The widow's case does not come before them." Then about 100 years later, Jeremiah writes, "Go up and down the streets of Jerusalem. Look around and consider. Search through her squares. If you can find but one person who deals honestly and seeks the truth, I will forgive this city. Has this house which bears my name become a den of robbers to you? But I have been watching, declares the Lord." So you see this downfall that's occurring. And then in 586, Jerusalem is conquered by the Babylonians. The city and the temple are destroyed, and the survivors are taken to Babylon as slaves. 50 years later, the Jewish people are allowed to return to Jerusalem, but it was not the same. And for 600 years, Jewish people spoke of, they told stories, they prayed for, they hoped, they longed for new life. They longed for a restored kingdom of God in Jerusalem. They prayed for a son of David, the Messiah, to rule. And that brings us to Matthew 21. Verse 1. As they approached Jerusalem and came to Bethphage on the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent 2 disciples, saying to them, "Go to the village ahead of you, and at once you will find a donkey tied there, with her colt by her.